For every product in this crazy world of ours, some things just sound like they go together, like peanut butter and jelly, like syrup and butter, bacon, lettuce, and tomato, and ghosts and goblins. And in the case of video games, I would think that a crossover between Crash Bandicoot and Spyro would have been a giant, no-brainer, easy victory for whoever got to be the creator. Both of them are venerable characters and possible system sellers for the PlayStation when these franchises were in their heydays, and the cartoon stylings of both make them a very easy match together, as the pair focus on ridiculous imaginations from magic and science. However, this crossover would paradoxically be headed up from a handheld project by the previous bastion of disappointments, Vicarious Visions, after Universal handed off the rights of the project to Vivendi, a surprisingly little heard of company for being a huge player in the industry at some point in time. What amazed me even more when I was researching for this video was that Vivendi was actually the party that introduced the project of the crossover on a handheld, possibly after they completely forgot to look at the previous handheld entries in the series and how bad they were. Maybe IGN gave them an 8 out of 10 for some reason, so I have no idea why the project was conceived originally as a handheld project, because everything else Crash has done on any handheld that Nintendo had at the time was mediocre shovelware at best. But, for better or worse, Vivendi sought out Vicarious, asked them to work on it, and ended up creating this 2-edition game. I'm sure the development process was the same slapdash under a year time scale after looking at the final product, because to say that this project hit some rocks during its creation is an understatement. This game is such a baffling mess of a title, even by Vicarious's own standards, because instead of simply creating yet another unremarkable platformer that fails to utilize the GBA in any regard like their past couple projects, they decided during this one to completely toss out the old formula for something that was truly innovative in its way of boring the hell out of the player. The game trades in a boilerplate level-based platforming progression system with some sort of 2D open-world scenario in which the player has to pilot Crash around the level and find minigames to complete in order to win crystals to open up the next hub until you get bored of the game and turn it off forever. The minigames, while being slightly enjoyable snippets of gameplay, similar to what WarioWare does, they are a shallow attempt to replace an actual game with a bunch of constant distractions. Going over the footage for this game, I was strangely reminded of Layton and the Mysterious Village, which I half finished one summer, because the minigames for this one are like the puzzles for that Layton game. They have absolutely nothing to do with the actual game, any of the characters, the story, and that's why all the gameplay in Crash Purple feels distracting, because the game just teleports you to where the minigame is taking place, you do the game, and then are transported immediately back to the hub with a crystal in your pocket, and nothing from what you did actually ties into the world of the game or anybody's lives. Crash isn't accomplishing anything for anybody other than just getting crystals and beating the villain. I have no idea how the crystals got there or why they are there in the first place. None of the characters seem to give a crap about what Crash is doing to actually get them. And compared to the original trilogy, yes, you do teleport everywhere to get crystals in random locations, but at the very least, Cortex and Coco mention that you are doing things, and in spite of the teleportation, in specifically the instance of Crash 3, the world of Crash still felt cohesive, but in Purple, it feels more like Crash is just being sent somewhere randomly that has an obstacle course set up to run in for no reason and for no other purpose than the game has to exist. Whereas again in Crash 3, you could very easily see that the locations that you were going to had actual purposes as a place that people could live and do things, like, for instance, the jousting level, which could very easily work as a medieval location where people would actually be doing things, whereas Now I have to ask, why is Crash randomly in a tank shooting a bunch of random nonsense for a goddamn carnival prize at the end? It makes no sense. And on top of that, the minigames, which are the only thing to do in the game, still get repetitive, in spite of Vicarious putting in 10 to a dozen different ones to do, which barely count when one of the mini-games is simply button mashing for less than a minute. Like, the tank driving around was cool and all, but when I have to do it 3 times in the game to get anywhere, then it starts getting boring and repetitive. The boss fights, which are the only other thing to do in Crash Purple, aren't actually garbage, strangely. They do have gimmicks and they have some challenge to them, but you are still over with most of them in under a minute or two, and the bosses still have no character or a lot of special abilities to convey a personality, and make me give a shit about dealing with them. They just pop in for no reason right at the end of the game, because this is a video game, it has to have boss fights, so here you frickin' go! The boss fights are just obligatory requirements to continue playing the game, rather than being the fun part of the game itself, like it is in a lot of other titles. What really struck me while looking at this game was that the animation and the cutscenes and just the general art style of everything actually managed to get worse after Entranced. With that game, the creators actually tried to do a little animation to show talking or a conversation, rather than just having text screens like a PowerPoint project. But here in Crash Purple, they essentially went back to the damn presentation model, and the best animation that they have is to move a static image back and forth while the actual drawn characters have some of the stupidest looking ass faces I've ever seen, even by Crash's old standard. They don't look cartoonish, it looks like the artist barely tried to put the right character on screen and draw them to what their model and expectation was supposed to be. And then on top of that, the levels look like crap. They went back to the old huge adventure, not even bothering to draw interesting backgrounds or interesting levels. And this thing's got a hub style design. If the hub itself is not interesting to explore and travel through, then it's just lending again into the freaking mentality that this game is boring trash and you should turn it off very quickly, because it's not going to offer you a good enough use of your time. You're going to be bored out of your mind, and that's what the game looks like. It looks boring, it looks slipshod. The premise is terrible. The characters do not care about what's going on, and there are still no jokes throughout the entire runtime. Maybe a total of 6 cutscenes, which last for a combined 4 minutes. The crossover that should have been a high point for both of these characters' careers ends up being the equivalent of watching a balloon deflate when you were promised classy dinner theater. I'm not going to lie and say that I was surprised by any of these 3 games we've done back to back here from Vicarious Visions. I've been through this exact same thing before when doing N-Space's 5 Call of Duty games all on the Nintendo DS. And exactly as predictably as these two, there are tons of these 2-bit developers that have no vision and nothing interesting to say out there in the world, with the only thing separating them and a paycheck to continue existing is an approval stamp from the platform holder. However, this bullshit has become a drowning presence on mobile phones due to the lower bar of entry, incentives from the platform holders to hold an open door to any app maker, and a gigantic audience gullible enough to download their crap. Vicarious Visions might not be the worst, and hell, they might not even be bad anymore. But let these games be a lesson to those out there that if it's going to have your name on it, do yourself the decent thing and at least try to make something good. Not something good enough to pass on shitty standards. Try to make something actually good that you would be proud of. And I want everyone to remember, especially the people who think I'm being unfair for whatever reason, this is Vicarious Visions' 3rd attempt at making a Crash Bandicoot game for the GBA, and it is nowhere near just 3 games that they put on this console. And it still looks this crappy. I'll end this video by tossing up another scoreboard for those hacks and leave you all out there with a victory for gamers for pushing through this shitstorm with me of a bunch of games. With this currently being the last Crash game on the list, next week we will be starting either a new franchise or hitting my catch-up backlog, so stay tuned for that at the very least. I hope you all had a good night, and I do want to apologize. I did record this while I was going through a sinus infection, which is why I sound so different from other videos I've done. And again, I do appreciate you for sticking through that, because I'm sure next week I'll be perfectly fine to continue making videos up to my usual standards. Once again, I hope you all have a good night and enjoy the weekend.